What's up, guys? I'm here at the desk continuing the series, Why is it so hard to write or draw with your arm? And you definitely want to check out the first two parts of this series. If you haven't yet, I'll link to the playlist that has all the videos that I've done so far in this series in the description. Definitely check those out. I'll be referring to some of the concepts that we covered in those videos in this video. So you'll be a little lost if you don't know what's up. Now for this video, I just want to talk about the actual arm movement for writing and drawing. So how you move your arm, the different types of arm movement, and we can actually start with the grip here, gripping the instrument, the pencil, the pen for arm movement. Now notice I'm using a pencil, which I think is a great way to practice arm movement. If you're using a pen, a lot of people like to draw with micron pens, and those have those little felt tips that you're just going to wear out if you practicing a bunch of arm movement. So pencil is a great tool. It actually there's actually a little more friction with the pencil, between the pencil and the paper, which helps a lot. So we're talking about arm movement and developing arm movement. We're trying to develop control, and something that immediately boosts your control is the friction between the tool and the surface that you're using the tool on. Okay, so any way you can increase that friction is going to be really helpful starting out. A great way, if you have access to a chalkboard, that's a really great way to start with arm movement, because one, you're standing up, so it's going to force you to move with your whole arm from the shoulder, and then two, the friction between the chalkboard and the chalk is really high, and it allows you to have a lot of control, and it's just a great way to start and really loosen up your arm muscles and start to develop some control. The other thing that is critical for arm movement, especially when you start out, is that things are a lot easier when you do them big. Okay, your arm was meant to make big movements, and if you're trying to use your whole arm to make tiny little strokes like this, it's going to be really hard to be accurate. Okay, like that. It's going to be really hard starting out because your arm was not made to make those small little movements. What we're trying to do is develop the arm to get it to the point where you can be accurate at these sizes, but we're not there yet. So working big is always easier starting out, and the chalkboard is another great, a chalkboard or a whiteboard or any type of really big surface, a big piece of paper is a great way to start when developing arm movement. All right, so let's get into the grip. Now, most people, when they grip a pencil or a pen, they hold it, which is called the tripod grip, and they rest the side of their hand right here on the table, on the paper, and then they do this type of action like this, okay? Now, this is great for this size writing. You can do this relatively easily. You have a lot of control making those marks. But this is very habitual. If you grip the pencil like this, if you put your hand on the table like that, it's going to be really hard for you to get away from this type of movement. So what I recommend is that you take a tip from the old penmanship instruction manuals of the early 1900s, and we're going to turn our hand like this. So we're going to go from this open grip like this to a palm down, back of the hand up grip like this. Now what this does is immediately makes it a lot harder to use your fingers to write, because you don't have that solid plant that you have like on the side of your hand. You can rest on the bottom of the wrist and get some control, but it's still harder than when you have it on the side. Plus doesn't feel normal to you, so you're gonna be more likely to kind of learn this new skill with this different grip. So turn your hand over. Now I like to kind of just glide these two fingernails or the sides of these fingers on the paper like this, and you can have this type of grip like this. And this is just great. You don't need to grip the pencil tight at all, because all the movement's coming from your arm, and this grip is just going to really promote arm movement. Now if you're drawing, you might want to put the pencil under your hand like this, hold it like this, and you can do your movements like this. All right. Same thing, same idea. Back of the palm is up, back of the hand is up, palm is down. This just changes the angle of the pencil, and it kind of puts it in all of your fingers like this. So it's really makes it even harder to kind of work with the fingers. So this might be a great place to start for you too, especially if you're drawing. Now the downside is that it changes the angle, and you might not want to make real thick marks that changing the angle might make. But once you've done this for a little while, you can also easily switch back to this and use the point of your instrument as well. So that's the grip. Just make sure the back of your hand is up, palm is down, and that is going to promote arm movement. Now let's talk about the two types of arm movement in this video. That's what we're going to really get into. And the first one is whole arm movement. So whole arm movement is really the easiest to explain. You just take your whole arm off the table. There's nothing resting on the table except maybe these two fingers are gliding on the paper like this, and then the pencil point or the instrument point is on the paper as well, okay? And with this, you can make really big movements across the page without any restriction. All right? Very free, hardest to control. So you have the most range of motion, and it's the hardest to control. This one's going to take, and well, for that reason, this is what you'll use to make big strokes. Okay, you're not going to try to do, little cross hatchings like this. It's just very difficult, even for somebody like me that's been practicing developing arm movement for over 3 years now on a very regular basis. It's very hard for me to use whole arm movement to work at a really small size. It's still very hard to control. Now when I go to this big size, it's a lot easier because it's a size that the arm was meant to work at. And the more you develop your whole arm movement, the smaller you'll be able to work at it with. And you'll be able to do smaller strokes that have the freedom and grace that whole arm movement provides, okay? The speed that you can write at. You can't make strokes like this with your fingers. It's literally impossible. You can go like this, and that's about as big as I can go if I want to do that pattern. And if I zoom in here, let me get this centered and zoom into it, you can see if you look closely how these lines aren't as smooth as these lines that I'm making with the whole arm movement, okay? These lines are nice and smooth and graceful, while when you're working with your fingers, you have just a lot kinkier lines that not as good form as far as making these nice round ellipses and curves, okay? So that's what's really great for whole arm movement. Big, graceful curves with really great line quality. And I think that's something a lot of people that are into drawing and writing are looking for, is line quality. So that's the whole arm movement. Now let's go to the muscular movement. And muscular movement was a term that they used in the penmanship manuals of the early 1900s. And this was kind of a compromise somewhat between whole arm movement and finger writing or drawing. So what they did, I'm going to show you my arm here, is you rest this part of your forearm muscle on the edge of the table. So you kind of just feel around here for the kind of biggest part of your forearm muscle, somewhere around here, and you plant that on the edge of the table. And you plant it on the edge, and then you can just kind of move around on that. So that muscle has elasticity to it. It has its ability to stretch and move around. And when you move your arm, when you kind of move your arm from your upper arm and your shoulder action, you can move around on that part of your forearm, okay? So when you do that, it looks like this, okay? Now it looks very similar to a whole arm movement, what you're seeing here on the camera, because you can't see my whole arm moving, but I don't have as big as range of motion. So this is about as big as I can go with my whole arm movement, and I can only go up and down about this much, okay? But you have a lot more control. So with the whole arm movement, our pivot point, our fulcrum, and as far as our lever goes, is like the shoulder joint. Now with this method, our fulcrum is down just below the elbow joint. So it's right here on that forearm part, forearm muscle. So what we're doing is we're shortening the lever. So with a shorter lever, you get less range of motion, but you also get more control. So this is great when you want to make those graceful lines, graceful curves but you don't want to, but you also want to have some control. So you need to do it maybe at a smaller size. All right. So, I really like muscular movement is if I can fit the stroke that I want to make with muscular movement. If I have enough range of motion with muscular movement, I'm always going to do it with muscular movement because I have tons of freedom and speed with muscular movement, but I have a lot more control than whole arm movement. So I really reserve whole arm movement to, I do a lot of calligraphy. I reserve whole arm movement to a stroke where I'm really trying to go like across the page. Let's say I've finished a letter or a word with an N, and then I want to underline the whole word like that. I would use whole arm movement because I just can't do this with muscular movement. But if I'm writing smaller and the word finishes with an N, I can do that with muscular movement. So this is whole arm and this is muscular. All right, so it's just a change in dimensions, change in size or magnitude where you need to pick the right type of movement, okay? Now, another kind of wrinkle with whole arm movement is that it's not quite as free in terms of every direction as whole arm movement. So whole arm movement, I can pretty freely go up and down and left and right, pretty much go in any direction with whole arm movement. And it all feels about the same. It might be a little easier in certain directions, but it's all relatively easy and hard to control. With muscular movement, it's really about the angle of your forearm to the paper. So right now, you can see my forearm's at about a 90-degree angle. And when I'm at this angle, the easiest movements I can make with the most control are going to be in this direction with this amount of curve on them, okay? If I want to go in this direction, now I'm actually using more shoulder movement to drive this motion. And now we know because of what we know about levers, now I'm using more shoulder motion. That's a bigger muscle. It's further away from the point of my pencil. It's a longer lever essentially. It's a little harder to control in this direction than it is in this direction, okay? And really this curve is the easiest to do because it follows the natural motion of the elbow hinge, okay? So that's just one thing to note. And I mean, if you do a lot of drawing, you probably already know this. When you want to make a stroke, you're going to turn the paper to go in a certain direction that's most comfortable to you. And if you're using muscular movement, it's going to be in this side-to-side movement, okay? So just something to note. All right, that gets into the types of arm movement you can do when writing or drawing. I'm going to cut this video off here. The next video will really be about experimenting with these types of motion and some exercises and drills that you can do that we've gotten from these old penmanship manuals to really develop this motion. So that's it for now. Look out for the next video. Should be linked in the playlist in this description if it's out yet. And check it out. Check out me on Instagram at Perfect Biscuits. You can see me writing and drawing with muscular movement there. And check out my website, perfectbiscuits.com, if you want to contact me privately. Love to hear from you, either through email or through a letter. And then, of course, subscribe to the channel and like this video if you like what you're seeing. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.